Are you sure she won't suspect anything? The voice, sharp and familiar, sliced through the quiet of my own home, freezing me in the hallway. It was my daughter-in-law, Clara. Of course not. That was my son, Liam. My Liam. His voice was calm, dismissive. She's too trusting. She's lived in her little world of paintings and tea for 40 years. She doesn't think like we do. I stood there holding the grocery bags, a carton of milk, feeling like a block of ice in my hand. I had just returned from the store, my weekly ritual. The front door was slightly ajar. I'd forgotten to pull it completely shut behind me. Now I was a prisoner in my own entryway, eavesdropping on a conversation I was never meant to hear. "We need to move fast, Liam." Clara's tone was all business, a stark contrast to the sweet, concerned mask she wore around me. "The offer from the developers is solid, $620,000, but it's only good for 10 days. We need her to sign the paperwork before she gets cold feet, or God forbid, talks to someone." "My mother doesn't talk to anyone," Liam said, and the statement wasn't one of sympathy, but of fact, a fact he was exploiting. "She's isolated. After Dad died, she just retreated. It's perfect." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. They were talking about my house, the house William and I built, the house where I'd painted every room, planted the magnolia tree in the backyard, and watched my son take his first steps. It wasn't just a structure. It was my skin, my memory, my soul. "I've already drawn up the documents with Paul's help," Clara continued. Paul was her brother, a slick lawyer with a smile that never reached his eyes. "We'll present it as a family investment. Tell her we're pooling resources to buy a multi-unit property. She'll get her own apartment, we'll manage the tenants, and everyone profits. She'll think she's securing her future. And she'll be signing over the deed to her house as her investment." Liam finished, a dark understanding passing between them that I could feel from the hallway. "Leaving her with no assets, completely dependent on us." "Exactly. And once we have control, we sell this dusty old place in a heartbeat, take the cash, and buy that waterfront property in Clearwater we've been dreaming of. She can have the basement suite if she behaves." I felt the world tilt. The patterned runner beneath my feet seemed to swirl. I had to lean against the wall, the rough texture of the wallpaper, a sudden, shocking anchor to reality. This wasn't just greed. It was a calculated, cold-hearted dismantling of my life. "Okay," Liam said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She should be back from the store any minute. Let's get the papers ready. Remember, we're doing this for her safety. She's too fragile to live alone." Fragile. The word was the final brutal blow. They saw me as a fragile, senile old woman, a piece of furniture to be moved and eventually discarded. A tear, hot and sharp, escaped and traced a path down my cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was one of pure, unadulterated rage. I backed away silently, slipping out the front door and closing it with a soft, definitive click. I stood on my porch in the gentle Carolina sun, and the world looked different. The colors were sharper, the sounds more distinct. The trust I had placed in my only child had been the foundation of my existence since my husband William passed, and in the space of 60 seconds that foundation had crumbled to dust. But they were wrong about one thing. I wasn't fragile, and I was far from stupid. Let me rewind. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am 68 years old, and if you passed me on the street in our quiet town of Pine Brook, you probably wouldn't give me a second glance. I'm the woman with the silver hair tied in a loose braid, wearing practical shoes and a canvas smock often stained with paint. For 40 years, I was William Reed's wife. 40 years of loving a good, quiet man who built custom furniture and whose laugh could fill a room. We were partners. He built the frames, I painted the landscapes that hung upon them. When cancer took him 2 years ago, a part of me went with him. The light in our home dimmed, and the silence that settled was a physical presence. Liam was my only solace. My brilliant son, the boy I read Tolkien to under the oak tree, the man I worked 2 secretarial jobs to put through business school. He met Clara 5 years ago, and I saw the change in him almost immediately. She was glamorous, ambitious, from a big city. She polished his edges and sharpened his ambitions, and I watched helpless as the soft-hearted boy I raised became harder, more focused on the bottom line. I told myself it was just growing up. I was happy if he was happy. After William died, they visited more frequently at first. Clara would fuss over the quaint decor and make comments about how much work the old house needed. "It's a money pit, Evelyn," she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern. "And all alone out here, what if you fall?" I'd just smile and change the subject. I loved this house. Its creaking floorboards were the soundtrack of my life. Its walls held the echoes of William's voice and Liam's childhood laughter. Then about 6 months ago, the visits took a new turn. They started talking about my legacy and my financial security. They suggested I consider liquidating my assets to be part of a dynamic family investment. And they painted a picture of a modern condominium complex where I would have a lovely maintenance-free apartment and they would handle all the business-generating income for all of us. It sounded so reasonable, so loving. Standing on that porch, the grocery bag cutting into my arm, I realized how perfectly I had played into their hands. My grief, my loneliness, my desperate desire to feel connected to my son, it had all made me the perfect mark. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I couldn't go back inside. Not yet. I left the groceries on the porch swing and walked my legs, moving on autopilot down to the small studio at the back of the property. It was William's workshop, a place I had avoided since his death, the pain too fresh. But now I needed its solace. The key was under the flower pot, right where he'd always left it. The door creaked open and the smell of sawdust and linseed oil washed over me, a scent so powerfully William that fresh tears welled in my eyes. But this time they were tempered with a new resolve. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the ghost of his presence. His tools hung neatly on the pegboard. A half-finished birdhouse sat on his workbench, a project frozen in time. I walked over to his old, battered roll-top desk. I hadn't opened it since he died. It felt too much like an invasion, but something was pulling me there now. I lifted the cover. Inside, everything was meticulously organized just as he'd left it. Receipts, sketches for furniture designs, old letters. And then I saw it. A thick, legal-sized envelope tucked at the back of a drawer. It was unmarked. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm of dread and anticipation. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out the contents. The first page was a letter in William's familiar, strong script. My dearest Evelyn. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling lost in that big house without me. I'm so sorry, my love. I had Paul Stevens draw this up last month. I didn't want to worry you while I was still here, but I've seen the way Liam looks at this place when he visits, especially with that new wife of his. There's a hunger in his eyes that I don't trust. He's my son and I love him, but money changes people. I've seen it before. This house, this land, it's not just an asset, Ellie. It's our life. I couldn't bear the thought of anyone, not even our own son, taking it from you or pressuring you into giving it up. So I've placed the property into an irrevocable trust. The paperwork is all here. You are the sole beneficiary and trustee for your lifetime. The house cannot be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without your explicit court-approved consent. Not even if someone tries to claim you're incompetent. I've made sure of it. It's yours, my love, always. Keep our home safe. All my love forever, William. I sank into his old wooden chair. The papers clutched to my chest, sobbing. They were sobs of grief, of relief, of a love that reached beyond the grave to protect me. William had known. He had seen the flaw in our son that I had been blind to. I read through the legal documents. They were complex, full of legalese, but the intent was crystal clear. William had thought of everything. He'd even included a clause that specifically prevented the property from being used as collateral for any debt not solely in my name. A fierce protective calm settled over me. They thought I was a helpless old woman. They thought they could manipulate me and steal my legacy. They thought I had no fight left in me. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I carefully placed the documents back into the envelope. I had my weapon. Now I needed a plan. I would not confront them. Not yet. I would play my part. The grieving, trusting mother. I would let them present their scheme. I would sign their papers. But I would have a surprise of my own waiting for them. I left the studio, locking it behind me. I walked back to the house, picked up the groceries, and pushed the front door open with a serene smile on my face. "Mom, there you are," Liam said, coming out of the kitchen. "We were getting worried." "Oh, I just got to chatting with Mrs. Peterson down the street." I lied, my voice steady. "You know how she is." Clara appeared behind him, a stack of papers in her hand. She was smiling, but her eyes were calculating, scanning my face for any sign of suspicion. "Perfect timing, Evelyn," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "We have the most exciting opportunity to discuss with you." I looked at my son, at the boy I had loved more than life itself, and I felt a profound, shattering sorrow. Then I looked at his wife, and I felt ice-cold determination. "An opportunity," I asked, my voice the picture of innocent curiosity. "That sounds wonderful. Tell me all about it." The game was on. "An opportunity," I asked, my voice the picture of innocent curiosity. "That sounds wonderful. Tell me all about it." I watched them exchange a quick, triumphant glance. They thought the fish was nibbling. Little did they know this fish had teeth. "Let's sit in the living room," Liam said, guiding me with a hand on my back that once felt protective and now felt possessive. I forced myself not to stiffen. I settled into my worn armchair, the one William had always claimed its fabric thin in places, from decades of use. It grounded me. Clara sat primly on the edge of the sofa, placing the papers on the coffee table between us. Liam remained standing, pacing slightly, the image of an excited entrepreneur. "It's about your future mom," he began, his voice taking on the rehearsed, persuasive tone I'd heard him use on business calls. "Clara and I have been so worried about you here all alone. This house is beautiful, but it's a lot of work, and the property values in Pine Brook are skyrocketing. It's the perfect time to make a strategic move." Clara leaned forward, her eyes wide with feigned sincerity. "We want us to be a real family, Evelyn, to build something together. We found a fantastic opportunity, a brand new 4-unit condominium building being constructed over in Oakdale. It's a prime location. We can all live in one unit, and the other 3 will provide a steady stream of rental income. It's financial security for all of us." I nodded slowly, letting my eyes wander between them as if I were processing this grand new idea. A condo in Oakdale. But this is my home. "I know, Mom," Liam said, his voice softening with a practiced empathy that made my stomach turn. "But think about it. No more mowing the lawn, no more worrying about a leaky roof. You'd have your own space, but we'd be right there. And the best part," he paused for dramatic effect, "your investment in this new venture would be this house. We'd sell it, and the proceeds would be our share of the down payment." He made it sound so simple, so logical, the perfect solution for a frail old woman and a golden opportunity for her loving son. I looked down at my hands folded in my lap and noticed a faint smudge of cobalt blue paint near my thumbnail, a reminder of who I really was. This is very sudden," I murmured, letting a tremor enter my voice. "I don't know anything about being a landlord." "We'll handle all of that." Clara jumped in her voice, brisk. "You won't have to lift a finger. Liam has the business acumen, and I have a knack for interior design and tenant management. It's what we're good at. You just get to enjoy your retirement and be a grandmother to our future children." She patted her flat stomach meaningfully. The mention of a grandchild was a masterstroke. A low blow aimed directly at my heart. I allowed a hopeful, watery smile to touch my lips. "Grandchildren. Oh, Liam?" He beamed, looking so much like the little boy who used to bring me dandelion bouquets that my heart ached with a fresh wave of loss. "It's a conversation for the future, Mom, but yes, we want that. We want you to be a big part of that. But to do that, we need to be together. We need to be secure." He gestured to the papers. "Paul helped us draw everything up. It's all very straightforward. We form a family LLC that's a limited liability company. You contribute the proceeds from the sale of this house, and we contribute our savings for the initial renovations and operating capital. We're all partners." I reached out and pulled the stack of papers toward me. The top page was titled, "Operating Agreement for Reed Family Holdings, LLC." It looked official, intimidating. My eyes scanned the dense text, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't need to be a lawyer to understand the gist. I was signing over my life, my security, my home. I looked up at them, their faces masks of eager expectation. It's just a lot to take in. All these legal terms. "Of course it is," Clara said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's complicated business. But that's why you have us. We'll take care of the complicated parts. You just need to trust us." Trust us. The words that had been my mantra for 68 years now sounded like a death sentence. I took a deep, shaky breath, playing my part to perfection. "William, he always handled these things." I let my voice break on his name. "I just don't know if I can do this alone." "You're not alone, Mom," Liam said, crouching in front of me, taking my hands in his. His were warm, confident. Mine were cold. "That's the whole point. Let me take care of you like Dad would have wanted. Let us build this future together." I looked into his eyes, searching for any flicker of the truth, any hint of the cruel conversation I'd overheard. There was nothing. Just a bland, determined sincerity. He was a better actor than I had ever given him credit for. I let a single tear escape and trail down my cheek. It wasn't entirely for show. "Okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Okay, if you really think this is best." The relief that flooded their faces was palpable. It was done. The silly old woman had fallen in line. "Wonderful." Clara clapped her hands together softly. "Now we just need to get the ball rolling. The market is hot, and we need to list this house immediately. We can have an open house this weekend. Paul said he can fast-track the LLC paperwork once you sign." They had it all planned out. No time for me to think, to talk to a friend, to seek independent advice. They were creating a whirlwind, and I was letting them sweep me up in it. "All right," I said, nodding slowly. "I'll sign. But can I have the night to read through it? Just to get comfortable with it all for my own peace of mind." And a flicker of impatience crossed Clara's face, but Liam squeezed my hands. "Of course, Mom. Of course. Take all the time you need. We'll come back tomorrow afternoon and we can all sign together. It'll be a new beginning for the Reed family." He helped me up and they both hugged me. Clara's hug was brief and stiff, like embracing a mannequin. Liam's was longer, and for a terrifying second, I almost broke, almost sobbed the whole truth into his shoulder. But I held fast. I patted his back, the image of a grateful mother. I walked them to the door, waving as they drove away in their sleek, expensive car. The moment their taillights disappeared around the corner, my smile vanished. The pleasant, confused facade fell away, replaced by a grim resolve. I locked the door and went straight to William's roll-top desk in the studio. I spread the LLC agreement they had given me next to the trust documents William had left me. I may have been a painter, but I was also a secretary for 40 years. I knew how to read carefully, how to spot discrepancies. And as I compared the two, the full, horrifying scope of their plan became clear. The LLC agreement stated that Liam and Clara would be the managing members with full authority to buy, sell, and manage property without the consent of the other members, me. My role was that of a silent investor, a bank. Furthermore, the operating agreement stipulated that any member, meaning me, could be forcibly bought out by a majority vote of the other members for any reason at a price determined by a third-party appraiser. They weren't just planning to use my house to buy a condo building. They were planning to take my money, then legally eject me from the company, leaving me with a pittance and no home. It was elegant, ruthless, and almost foolproof. Almost. Because they didn't know about William's trust. According to the trust, I couldn't sell this house. Not without a court order that would be nearly impossible to get given its ironclad language. Their entire scheme was built on a foundation of sand. A plan began to form in my mind, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. I would not just stop them. I would make them reveal themselves. I would make my son look me in the eye and show me who he had truly become. The next day, I dressed carefully. I put on the string of pearls William had given me for our 40th anniversary and a simple, nice dress. I was not going to be the vulnerable old woman today. I was going to be Evelyn Reed, a woman who had built a life and a home and who was not about to let it be stolen. When Liam and Clara returned at 2 o'clock, I had a pot of tea waiting. I was calm. I was ready. "Ready to make it official, Mom?" Liam asked, beaming as he walked in. "I am," I said, my voice steady. I gestured to the papers on the table. "I just have one question before I sign." Clara's smile tightened. "What's that, Evelyn?" I looked directly at Liam. "This LLC agreement. It says you and Clara will be the managing members. That means you have the power to sell assets without my signature, correct?" Liam's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, yes, but that's just a technicality. It's so we can act quickly on business opportunities without having to bother you with every little detail." "I see," I said slowly. "And this clause about a forced buyout, if you and Clara decided you didn't want me as a partner anymore, you could vote to have me removed from the company, and I'd have to sell my share to you at a price you set." The air in the room went stale. Clara's face lost its pleasant mask, her eyes turning hard. Liam looked stunned, like a student who'd been caught cheating. "Mom, why would you even think that?" he said, trying to laugh it off. "We're family. This is about us being together." "Is it?" I asked, my gaze never leaving his. "Or is it about you getting your hands on $620,000? The silence that followed was deafening. I had taken my first shot across their bow. The game was no longer hidden. It was out in the open, and the battle for my home had officially begun. The silence in the room was so profound I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick a hammer blow to the remnants of our relationship. Liam's face cycled through emotions, shock, confusion, and finally a dawning defensive anger. Clara, however, didn't bother with pretense anymore. Her expression solidified into a mask of cold fury. $620,000! Liam finally choked out, his voice strained. "Where did you hear that? Who have you been talking to? Does it matter?" I replied, my voice eerily calm compared to the storm raging inside me. "The question is whether it's true. Is that the number you have in mind for my home? For my life?" Clara stood up, her movements sharp and predatory. "This is exactly why we need to do this, Evelyn. You're becoming paranoid. You hear things. You're isolated out here in this mausoleum." She swept her hand around the living room, dismissing 40 years of love and memory with a single gesture. "I'm not paranoid, Clara. I'm observant. I kept my eyes locked on my son. I overheard you two. Yesterday, before I came in with the groceries. You talked about the developer's offer. You talked about me being too trusting. You planned to put me in a basement suite in Clearwater if I behaved." The color drained from Liam's face. He looked like I'd physically struck him. "Mom, Don't you dare!" "Liam," Clara snapped, cutting him off. Her gaze was venomous as she turned it back to me. "So what? You're not going to sign after all we've done for you, after all the worry and care." "What care, Clara?" I asked, my composure beginning to crack, allowing a sliver of the pain to show. "The care of plotting to steal my house. The care of planning to ship me off to Florida like a piece of unwanted luggage. That's not care. That's predation." Liam found his voice, and it was laced with a whining desperation that was somehow worse than Clara's open hostility. "It's not like that, Mom. You're twisting it. This is a business opportunity for all of us. Yes, we'd sell this house. It's an asset, and we'd reinvest it. For our family. For your future grandchildren. You're going to throw all that away because you overheard something out of context. There was no context that would make what I heard acceptable, Liam." I stood up, needing to be on my feet to meet them as an equal. "You were conspiring to defraud me. It's that simple." Clara let out a harsh, mocking laugh. Defraud you? You're being dramatic. We're trying to save you from your own incompetence. Do you even know what your property taxes will be next year? Do you have a plan for when the roof needs replacing? You're living in a fantasy world, Evelyn, and we're the ones who are going to be left cleaning up the mess when it all comes crashing down. The only mess here is the one you're trying to create. I fired back, my temper finally igniting. And as for my competence, I can assure you it's perfectly intact. Intact enough to see through this transparent, greedy little scheme of yours. Liam stepped forward, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. Mom, please, just sign the papers. Trust me. I'm your son. Don't you trust me? That was the question, wasn't it? The fundamental cord that had been severed. I looked at him, at the man who had replaced my little boy, and I felt a sorrow so deep it was a physical ache. No, Liam, I said softly, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. I don't. The admission hung in the air, stark and irreversible. His face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the wounded child again. But it was quickly replaced by a resentful anger. Fine, he spat the word sharp and final. If that's how you want it. But you can't manage this place on your own. You'll lose it. And when you come crawling to us for help, don't expect a warm welcome. I would rather lose this house to the bank than hand it over to you, I said, and I meant every word. But it won't come to that. Clara's eyes narrowed into slits. What is that supposed to mean? I walked to William's roll-top desk, which I had moved into the living room corner for this very moment. I opened it and pulled out the thick, legal-sized envelope. I didn't hand it to them. I simply held it up. It means that your plan was doomed from the start, I said, my voice gaining strength with every word. William knew. He saw the man you were becoming, Liam. He saw your hunger. So a month before he died, he had Paul Stevens help him place this house and all the land into an irrevocable trust. I am the lifetime beneficiary and trustee. I cannot sell it, mortgage it, or transfer it. Not for an LLC. Not for you. Not for anyone. The only way you were ever getting this property was if I willingly signed it over to you, which, thanks to your own vile words, I will never, ever do. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Liam looked like he'd been gut-punched. He stumbled back a step, his eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning horror. No, Dad wouldn't. He couldn't. He did, I said, a bitter triumph in my heart. He protected me from you. But Clara's reaction was different. The cold fury on her face melted away, replaced by something calculating, something even more dangerous. She wasn't defeated. She was re-evaluating the battlefield. An irrevocable trust, she repeated slowly, her voice a low, thoughtful murmur. She looked from the envelope in my hand to my face, and a new terrifying smile played on her lips. It was the smile of a serpent that had found a new, more interesting prey. Well, she said, her voice dripping with a faux chilling sweetness, that does change things, doesn't it, Liam? She placed a hand on his arm, but it wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a command to silence him. She took a step toward me, her eyes locked on mine. A trust like that, it's designed to protect assets from creditors, from lawsuits, from reckless spending. It assumes the beneficiary is of sound mind and body to manage their own affairs. A cold dread began to trickle down my spine. Where was she going with this? But what if the beneficiary isn't sound? She continued, her voice soft and lethal. What if she's become a danger to herself, forgetful, paranoid, hearing things that aren't there, making reckless accusations against her own family? What then, Evelyn? Who protects the asset from you? The world seemed to slow down. I understood her meaning with terrifying clarity. They weren't going to try to sweet-talk me anymore. They weren't going to try to trick me with legal documents. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent. Liam's head snapped toward Clara, a confused hope dawning in his eyes. Clara, what are you? It's simple, darling, she said, never breaking eye contact with me. If your mother is no longer deemed mentally capable of managing her own affairs, the courts will appoint a guardian, a conservator. And as her only child, who do you think they'll choose? You'll have legal control over everything. The trust won't matter then. The floor felt like it was falling away beneath me. This was their new plan. They were going to drag me through the mud, paint me as a senile, unstable old woman, and have a judge strip me of my rights. You wouldn't dare, I whispered, the breath catching in my chest. Oh, we would, Clara said, her smile widening into a genuine, horrifying grin. We absolutely would. We gave you the chance to do this the easy way, Evelyn. You chose the hard way. So let's play. She grabbed the LLC agreement from the table, crumpled it in her hand, and tossed it onto the floor. Then she took Liam's arm, pulling him toward the door. Come on, Liam, we have calls to make. We need to find a good probate attorney. Liam looked back at me, a complex storm of guilt, shame, and a desperate burgeoning hope in his eyes. He was letting her lead him. He was choosing her. Again. Mom, he mumbled, but it was a weak, hollow sound. Get out of my house, I said, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so pure it felt like clarity. They left, closing the door behind them with a soft, definitive click. I was alone again. But the silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence before a war. They had thrown down the gauntlet. They were coming for my freedom, my sanity, my very personhood. I looked down at the envelope in my hand, William's final gift. It had been my shield. But now I needed a sword. I needed a lawyer of my own, a fighter. I walked to the phone, my hands steady now. I dialed information. Yes, I said, my voice firm. I need the number for the Carolina State Bar. I'm looking for an attorney who specializes in elder law and contested guardianships. The battle for my home was over. The battle for my mind was about to begin. The woman on the other end of the line at the state bar had a pleasant, efficient voice. She gave me 3 names in the Oakdale area specializing in elder law. The first 2 were voicemails, their polished recordings promising to return my call as soon as possible. I left shaky messages trying to sound less like a terrified old woman and more like a client with a serious, urgent matter. The third number connected me directly to a live person. Law Office of Robert Thorne, a no-nonsense female voice answered. Hello. I began, my voice betraying me with a slight quaver. My name is Evelyn Reed. I need to speak with an attorney. It's about my son. He's trying to have me declared incompetent. There was a brief pause on the line, not of hesitation, but of focused attention. I see. Hold one moment, Mrs. Reed. The hold music was classical, something with cellos that was both soothing and solemn. Within 30 seconds, a new voice came on the line, deep, calm, and possessing an immediate, grounded authority. Mrs. Reed, Robert Thorne, my assistant tells me you're facing a potential guardianship petition. He didn't sound rushed or skeptical. He sounded like a man who heard these stories every day. Yes, I said, relief making me lightheaded. They just left my house, my son and his wife. They said they would have me declared a danger to myself. They want control of my property. Where are you right now? He asked. I'm at home, in Pine Brook. And are you safe? Are you alone? The questions were simple, but the care behind them undid me. I'm safe, I managed. And I'm alone. Good. Now take a deep breath. Nothing is going to happen today. These processes take time. The first thing we need to do is talk. Can you come to my office in Oakdale tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock? I glanced at the clock. I hadn't driven to Oakdale in over a year. The interstate traffic intimidated me. But the thought of staying in this house, waiting for them to return with a court order, was far more terrifying. Yes, I said, my voice firming. I'll be there. Excellent. My assistant will give you the address. Mrs. Reed, bring any documents you have. Everything. We'll see you then. The next morning, I dressed with even more care than the day before. This was my armor. I put on my pearls, a navy blue dress, and a blazer. I looked in the mirror and saw a dignified, respectable woman. A woman who was not losing her mind. A woman ready to fight. Thorne's office was in a historic brick building in downtown Oakdale, not a sterile glass high-rise. It felt established, substantial. His assistant, a woman in her 50s named Margaret with kind eyes and a firm handshake, ushered me into a conference room with a view of the mountains. The room smelled of old wood and lemon polish. Robert Thorne was not what I expected. He was probably in his late 40s with a lean frame, sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a demeanor that was both intensely focused and deeply calm. He didn't wear a power suit. He wore a tweed jacket with leather patches on the elbows. He looked more like a tenacious literature professor than a courtroom brawler. He stood and shook my hand. "Mrs. Reed, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." I laid it all out for him. I started with William's death, my loneliness, Liam and Clara's increasing presence. I told him about the overheard conversation, the LLC agreement, the $620,000 figure, the plan for Clearwater. My voice only broke once when I recounted Liam asking me to trust him. Then I showed him the trust documents William had left me. Thorne read them in silence, his eyes scanning the pages with practiced speed. A slight approving smile touched his lips. "William Reed was a very wise man," he said softly. "This is an exceptionally well-drafted trust, bulletproof for the most part against the kind of financial exploitation your son was attempting." He set the trust documents aside and steepled his fingers. "But as your daughter-in-law correctly identified, a trust is not a shield against a guardianship proceeding. If they can convince a judge that you lack the capacity to manage your own affairs, the court can override the trust's provisions and appoint a guardian, a conservator, we call it in Carolina, to manage everything for you." The dread returned cold and heavy. "So they can still win. They can try." Thorne corrected his voice, firm. "But it is a difficult, invasive, and expensive process for them. The burden of proof is on them. They must provide clear and convincing evidence that you are unable to manage your own financial affairs or your personal health and safety. We will make that burden feel like a mountain on their backs." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. "Mrs. Reed, I need you to understand something. This will be unpleasant. They will attempt to gather evidence against you. They may try to get letters from your doctor, interview your neighbors, dig through your trash for anything that suggests confusion or poor judgment. They will paint a picture of a helpless, deteriorating woman. Our job is to paint the true picture, that of a capable, intelligent woman being targeted by avaricious relatives." "I understand," I said, my spine straightening. "What do I need to do?" "First, we go on the offensive. We file a notice of conflict with the probate court. This preemptively alerts the court that there is a dispute and that you are represented by counsel. It often makes petitioners think twice. Second, we have you evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist of our choosing. We get a report stating you are perfectly sound. Third, we build a fortress of evidence about your competence." He handed me a legal pad. "I want you to start keeping a journal. Every interaction with Liam or Clara. Date time what was said. Do not engage with them on the phone if you can help it. If they come to the house, do not let them in. Tell them to speak to your attorney. You must become a fortress." I nodded, taking notes, a soldier receiving orders. "Finally," Thorne said, his tone grave, "we need to discuss their attorney. You mentioned Paul Stevens is Clara's brother." "Yes." Thorne's mouth set in a hard line. "I know Paul. He's aggressive. He specializes in fast hardball tactics. He'll try to overwhelm us with motions, drag you into depositions, run up your legal bills, hoping you'll capitulate. He's good at making people feel cornered." I felt a flutter of panic. How much will this cost?" "My retainer is $12,000, he said, watching my reaction. "It will likely cost more before this is over. Perhaps significantly more." I didn't flinch. I thought of the $620,000 they wanted to steal. $12,000 to protect me, was a bargain. I reached into my purse and pulled out my checkbook. My hand was steady as I wrote the figure. It was a large portion of my liquid savings, but it was also my first definitive act of war. "I'm not going to capitulate, Mr. Thorne," I said, sliding the check across the polished table. He took it and gave a slow, approving nod. "Good. Then let's get to work." I left his office an hour later, my head spinning with legal strategy, but my heart fortified. I had a general. I had an army of one, but it was a start. When I returned to Pine Brook, I saw Liam's car parked in my driveway. My new resolve was tested immediately. He was standing on the porch looking lost. I pulled up, but didn't get out of the car immediately. I rolled down the window. "You need to leave, Liam." "Mom, please, can we just talk without Clara? This has gotten out of hand." "Talk to my attorney," I said, repeating Thorne's script. "His name is Robert Thorne. All communication should go through him now." His face darkened. "You hired a lawyer against your own family. Mom, this is insane." "Is it?" I asked, my voice cold. "You're the one who threatened to have me declared insane. Now please leave my property or I will call the sheriff." The shock on his face was genuine. I had never spoken to him like that in my life. I had never had to. He stared at me for a long moment as if seeing me for the first time, not as his mother, but as an adversary. He got into his car without another word and sped away. That night, I started my journal. April 14th, 4:30 p.m. Liam came to the house alone. I refused to speak with him and instructed him to contact my attorney, Robert Thorne. He seemed angry and called my actions insane. He left when I threatened to call the sheriff. The words were clinical cold. Writing them down felt like building a wall brick by brick. I was following my lawyer's orders. I was building my fortress. But as I lay in bed that night, the silence of the house felt different again. It was no longer the silence of grief or the silence before war. It was the anxious, humming silence of a bunker. I was inside safe for now, but I knew the artillery barrage was coming. Paul Stevens was loading his guns, and my son was standing beside him, ready to take aim at my mind. The battle lines were drawn. The first salvo had been fired, and I, Evelyn Reed, 68-year-old widow and painter, was hunkered down for the siege of my life. The artillery barrage began not with a bang, but with the polite, firm knock of a county sheriff's deputy on my front door 1 week later. He was a young man, his face a mask of professional neutrality, holding a thick manila envelope. "Evelyn Reed?" he asked. My heart plummeted into my stomach. I knew what this was. "Yes, you've been served, ma'am." He handed me the envelope. "Have a good day." The door closed, and I stood in the foyer, the weight of the papers in my hand feeling like a lead brick. I carried them to the kitchen table, my movements slow and heavy. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the contents. The top page was stark and official. In the General Court of Justice, Probate Division, Pine Brook County, Carolina, in the matter of the guardianship of Evelyn Ann Reed, an alleged incompetent adult. And the word incompetent screamed up at me from the page, each letter a punch to the gut. I forced myself to read on. The petition filed by Paul Stevens on behalf of my son Leonardo, Michael Reed, was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted a picture of a woman in rapid, irreversible decline. It claimed I was suffering from severe cognitive impairment likely due to undiagnosed dementia. It stated I was forgetful, often failing to turn off the stove or lock doors. It alleged I exhibited paranoid behavior, including making baseless and hurtful accusations of theft and conspiracy against her only child. It cited my social isolation and inability to manage financial affairs as evidence of my need for protection. It mentioned my failure to maintain the property, pointing to the overgrown garden, my garden, which I had let go not out of incapacity but out of grief. The most devastating blow was saved for the final page. As evidence of my current state, they had included a supporting declaration from Dr. Ian Murray, my primary care physician of 20 years, the man who had treated William through his final illness, the man I trusted. His statement was brief and clinical. It noted that during my last annual physical, I had seemed somewhat distracted and had difficulty recalling the specific dates of my husband's passing and subsequent medical appointments. He concluded that while not making a formal diagnosis, he had concerns about Mrs. Reed's cognitive function and would recommend a full neurological workup. I put the paper down, my vision blurring with hot, furious tears. He had taken my grief, my very human struggle in that first year without William, and weaponized it. A casual comment in his office, a moment of vulnerability, had been twisted into a clinical assessment. The world tilted. This was real. It was in the court system now. My son, my own flesh and blood, had officially and publicly labeled me a lunatic. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the ugly words. The sound of the phone ringing jarred me back to the present. It was Robert Thorne. "Evelyn," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "My office just received the filed petition. I've seen it." They have a statement from Dr. Murray," I choked out. "I know, don't panic, this is standard. They go to your GP, who has a duty to report concerns, and they get a vague, cautious statement that sounds terrible out of context. We will handle it." "How?" The word was a plea. "First, we have our evaluation with Dr. Anya Sharma tomorrow at 10. She's a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist and a formidable expert witness. Her opinion will carry far more weight than Dr. Murray's vague concerns. Second, we are going to file a blistering response that paints the true picture. But I need you to do something for me, Evelyn. I need you to get angry." "I am angry," I whispered. "Good. Channel it. I want you to write down everything you've done in the last month that demonstrates competence. Paying bills, balancing your checkbook, grocery shopping, driving, anything. I also want you to call 3 people you know, neighbors, friends, and ask if they would be willing to provide a character affidavit on your behalf. It's time to mobilize your troops." After I hung up, I did exactly as he said. I fought back the despair by making lists. I wrote down every bill I'd paid on time. I noted the complex color theory I was using in my current painting. I documented the fact that I'd driven myself to Oakdale and back without incident. It was a strange clinical exercise in proving my own sanity. Then I made the calls. The first was to Helen Peterson, my neighbor. I told her, my voice shaking, what was happening. "That vile, greedy boy," she exclaimed without a moment's hesitation. "Evelyn, of course I'll help. I see you every week. You're sharper than I am. This is an outrage." The second call was to Tom Bradley, the owner of the local hardware store. I'd known him for decades. "Liam's doing what?" he boomed. "I just sold you a set of washers and O-rings last week, and you explained the whole plumbing fix you were doing. Sounded like you knew more than me." "You tell your lawyer I'll say whatever he needs." The third call was the hardest. I called William's oldest friend, Samuel Jones, a retired judge. I humbled myself and explained the situation. There was a long silence on the line. "Evelyn," he said, his voice gravelly with age and emotion. "William was my best friend. I watched you two build that life together. For Liam to do this, it's a betrayal of everything his father stood for. Send your lawyer my way. I'll not only provide an affidavit, I'll make some calls. This kind of predatory litigation makes me sick." When I hung up, I was crying again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. I was not as alone as I had thought. My fortress had allies. The next day, I met Dr. Anya Sharma. She was a tall, elegant woman with a warm, intelligent gaze that seemed to see right through me. Her office was quiet, filled with plants and soft light. The evaluation took 3 hours. It was exhaustive. She tested my memory, my reasoning, my ability to perform complex tasks. She asked about my life, about William, about Liam. I told her everything, including the overheard conversation and the subsequent legal battle. At the end, she set her pen down. "Mrs. Reed," she said, "I can state with a high degree of medical certainty that you do not meet the criteria for dementia or any major neurocognitive disorder. You are experiencing situational depression and anxiety, which is completely understandable given the loss of your husband and the current profoundly stressful situation with your son. Your cognitive function is well within the normal range for your age and education level. In fact, your recall of specific dates and financial details is exceptional." I left her office, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I had a shield now, a medical opinion, to counter their lies. A few days later, Robert Thorne filed our response. It was a 20-page document that systematically dismantled their petition. It included Dr. Sharma's preliminary report, affidavits from Helen Tom and Judge Jones, and my own detailed lists of competent activities. It accused Liam and Clara of bad faith and ulterior motives, explicitly outlining their failed financial scheme and my protected status under the trust. The war was now a matter of public record, and we had fired back with everything we had. The response from Paul Stevens was swift and brutal. He filed a motion for a temporary guardianship, asking the court to grant Liam immediate control of my affairs, pending the full hearing, claiming I was in imminent danger of financial ruin and self-neglect. A court date was set for the following week, a hearing where a judge would decide in a matter of hours whether I would retain my freedom or whether my son would become my legal master. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stood in my studio looking at the half-finished painting on my easel, a landscape of the Blue Ridge Mountains at sunrise full of light and hope. It felt like a relic from another lifetime. I was no longer just fighting for my house. I was fighting for my right to be considered a person. The battle for my mind had reached its first critical climax. Tomorrow I would stand before a judge and prove I was sane while my son sat across the room and argued that I was mad. The absurdity of it was terrifying. The betrayal was paralyzing. But as I looked at William's tools hanging on the wall, I felt a surge of his quiet strength. He had built this fortress for me. Now I had to be the one to defend it. I was ready for my day in court. The Pine Brook County Courthouse was a monument to solid, unyielding justice built of granite and old wood. Every echo in the marbled hallway felt like a judgment. I walked beside Robert Thorne, my back straight, my pearls a cool, hard line against my throat. Margaret, his assistant, followed, carrying a thick binder of our evidence. We were a small, determined platoon marching into battle. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate, and therefore more terrifying. The judge's bench loomed at the front. To the right at their table sat Liam, Clara, and Paul Stevens. Paul was a shark in a $1,000 suit, all sharp angles and a predatory gleam in his eye. Liam wouldn't look at me. He stared at his hands clenched on the table. Clara, however, met my gaze with a look of such pure, undiluted venom that I felt it like a physical blow. We took our seats at the left-hand table. Thorne gave my arm a reassuring pat. "Remember, Evelyn, you are the picture of competence. Sit tall. Listen carefully. Let me do the talking unless the judge asks you directly." The bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Walker." The door behind the bench opened, and a woman in her 60s with a stern, intelligent face and a no-nonsense gray bob entered. She moved with an air of brisk efficiency, surveying the room as she took her seat. "Be seated," she said, her voice clear and carrying. She looked over the papers before her. "This is the matter of the guardianship of Evelyn Ann Reed. I understand this is a petition for a temporary guardianship. Mr. Stevens, you may begin." Paul Stevens stood oozing confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a sad but necessary case. We are here today because Leonardo Reed loves his mother. He's watching her deteriorate before his eyes, and his primary concern is her safety and well-being." He painted a horrifying picture. He spoke of a lonely, confused widow, a woman who left stoves on doors unlocked, who was vulnerable to scams. He cited Dr. Murray's declaration emphasizing the concerns and difficulty recalling dates. He described my paranoid outburst when they presented their family investment plan, framing it as a loving son's attempt to secure his mother's future, met with irrational accusations. "Your Honor," Stevens said, his voice dripping with false sorrow, "we are not here to take away Mrs. Reed's freedom. We are here to give her the protection she so clearly needs. We are asking for a temporary guardianship over her person and estate so that her son, a successful businessman, can ensure her bills are paid, her home is maintained, and she is safe from her own increasing incapacity." He sat down, looking supremely pleased with himself. I felt sick. He had taken the truth and twisted it into a perfect, pathetic narrative. Judge Walker turned her gaze to our table. "Mr. Thorne." Robert Thorne stood calm and composed. Thank you, Your Honor. What we have just heard is a work of fiction, a narrative constructed to justify the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The only thing Mrs. Reed is vulnerable to is the greed of her son and daughter-in-law. He laid out our case with methodical precision. He started with William's trust, explaining its ironclad provisions. Mr. Reed and his wife did not like this trust, Your Honor. It prevented them from getting their hands on Mrs. Reed's primary asset. So when their initial scheme, a fraudulent LLC designed to strip her of her home, failed, they pivoted to this in an attempt to have her declared incompetent so the trust could be bypassed entirely. He entered our evidence into the record. Dr. Sharma's detailed report, which explicitly stated I was not suffering from dementia. The affidavits from my neighbors and Judge Jones, all attesting to my sound mind and sharp faculties. Then he played his ace. Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence a journal entry written by Mrs. Reed herself, dated the day after the alleged paranoid outburst. Stevens shot to his feet. Objection, hearsay, self-serving, Your Honor, Thorne said calmly. It is a contemporaneous record of her state of mind and the events as they occurred. It goes directly to the issue of capacity and motive. I'll allow it, Judge Walker said, her eyes keen with interest. Thorne read my entry aloud, his voice clear and neutral in the quiet room. April 14th, 4:30 p.m. Liam came to the house alone. I refused to speak with him and instructed him to contact my attorney, Robert Thorne. He seemed angry and called my actions insane. He left when I threatened to call the sheriff. He looked up at the judge. This is not the writing of a confused woman. This is the writing of a woman who is lucid, detailed, and protecting herself from a perceived threat. The threat, Your Honor, is real. He then called me to the stand. My legs felt like water, but I walked steadily to the witness box and was sworn in. Thorne led me through my story gently. I spoke of William, of our life, of the trust he created out of love and foresight. I described my voice shaking only slightly the conversation I had overheard. I told them about the $620,000, the plan for Clearwater, the basement suite. Mrs. Reed, Thorne asked softly, why did you hire me? I looked directly at Liam. He was still staring at his hands, but his neck was flushed a deep, blotchy red. Because they told me they would have me declared incompetent. They said they would prove I was a danger to myself. I was scared. So I decided to fight. Then it was Paul Stevens's turn for cross-examination. He approached the stand like a wolf circling prey. Mrs. Reed, isn't it true you've been forgetful lately, missing appointments, leaving the stove on? No. I said, my voice firm. That is not true. You don't recall Dr. Murray expressing concern about your memory. I recall him noting that I was sad about my husband's passing during my physical. I was grieving. I am not cognitively impaired. He switched tactics, his tone becoming sarcastic. So you expect this court to believe that your only son whom you raised is part of a vast conspiracy to steal your home. I looked at him, then at Liam, and finally at the judge. I don't know about a vast conspiracy, Your Honor. I just know what I heard, and I know that my son is sitting in this courtroom asking you to take away my rights instead of apologizing to his mother. The courtroom was silent. Stevens, for the first time, seemed momentarily thrown. He had no more questions. Judge Walker called for a short recess. The 20 minutes we waited felt like 20 hours. Liam and Clara huddled with Stevens, their conversation intense and angry. Thorne sat beside me, serene. Whatever happens, Evelyn, he murmured, you have shown them you are not an easy target. You have shown the court who you are. When Judge Walker returned, her face was unreadable. She steepled her fingers and looked from our table to theirs. This is a deeply troubling case. She began, her voice echoing in the silent room. The court is faced with two diametrically opposed narratives. On one hand, a son expressing concern for his mother's welfare. On the other, a mother alleging a predatory financial scheme. She looked down at the documents before her. The burden of proof for a temporary guardianship is high. The petitioner must show clear and convincing evidence of imminent danger. I have reviewed the evidence. Dr. Murray's concerns, while noted, are vague and contextual. They are far outweighed by the detailed and compelling report of Dr. Sharma. Her gaze settled on Liam. Mr. Reed, the court is deeply concerned by the timeline of events. The attempt to have your mother sign over her home, followed immediately by this petition when that failed, creates a strong appearance of ulterior motives. She took a deep breath. The petition for a temporary guardianship is denied. A sob of relief escaped me. I clutched the edge of the table. However, Judge Walker continued, and my heart seized again. This matter is not concluded. A full hearing on the permanent guardianship will be scheduled. In the interim, I am issuing a mutual no-contact order. Neither party is to contact the other outside the presence of their legal counsel. This is for the protection of all involved. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. The room erupted in sound. Stevens was already gathering his papers, his face a thundercloud. Clara shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred before storming out. Liam finally looked up and our eyes met across the courtroom. What I saw there wasn't remorse. It was defeat and a simmering, bitter anger. We had won the battle. We had stopped them from seizing immediate control, but the war was far from over. The permanent hearing loomed ahead, a more complex, more expensive, more draining conflict. As we walked out of the courthouse into the blinding sun, I felt exhausted but victorious. I was still free. I was still in control of my own mind and my own home. But I knew with a cold certainty that Liam and Clara would not give up. They had been humiliated in court. They had lost a significant round, and cornered, humiliated animals are the most dangerous kind. The siege had been lifted, but I was still inside my fortress watching the enemy camp regroup on the horizon. They were licking their wounds, but they were not retreating. They were planning their next, more desperate attack. The victory in the courtroom was hollow, a brief respite in a war that was far from over. The mutual no-contact order was a relief, a legal barrier that gave me a semblance of peace. For a few weeks, the silence felt genuine, not like the anxious hum of a bunker. I painted. I tended my garden, reclaiming it from the neglect they had used as evidence against me. I had coffee with Helen. I tried to stitch the torn fabric of my life back together. But Robert Thorne was not relaxing. "They're regrouping, Evelyn," he told me during one of our weekly calls. "Paul Stevens doesn't give up after one loss. He'll be looking for a new angle, a weakness we haven't fortified." The permanent guardianship hearing was now 3 months away, a dark cloud on the horizon. The temporary hearing had been a sprint. This would be a marathon, draining my finances and my spirit. Thorne had me preparing for endless depositions, digging through decades of financial records to prove my consistent, capable management. It was during this deep dive into the past that I found it. Tucked inside an old tax folder from 2005 behind a stack of receipts was a small, folded piece of stationery I didn't recognize. The paper was thick, expensive, with a delicate, embossed floral border. My heart stuttered when I saw the handwriting. It was William's, but different from the strong, confident script I knew. This was softer, more intimate, a secret hand. "My dearest M." Another night lying beside her, dreaming of you. The weight of this double life is a stone on my chest, but the thought of your smile is the only thing that lets me breathe. The business is struggling more than I let on. The loan is secured, but the payments are crippling. I can't tell Evelyn. She believes in the man I pretend to be. Only you know the real me, the fragile one. I'll see you Thursday. Always A. The world did not tilt. It shattered. It exploded into a million sharp, glittering shards that sliced through every memory, every certainty I had ever held. My dearest M, a double life. Alone. The business is struggling. William's custom furniture business. He'd always told me it was comfortable, stable. We never wanted for anything. He'd taken a small loan to expand the workshop he said paid off years ago. She believes in the man I pretend to be. I sat on the floor of my studio, the paper trembling in my hand. The trust, the beautiful, protective trust. Was it built on a foundation of lies? Was he not protecting me from Liam, but hiding his own secrets from me? Who was M? How many Thursdays were there? How many years? The grief that washed over me was new and terrifying. It wasn't the clean, sharp grief of losing him to cancer. This was a rotten, complicated grief polluted by betrayal and a fundamental rewriting of my own history. The 40 years of my marriage, the bedrock of my entire adult life, now felt like a stage set, and I was the only one who didn't know she was in a play. I didn't call Thorne. I couldn't. This was a wound I had to lick alone. For 2 days, I moved through the house like a ghost, the secret note burning a hole in my pocket. I looked at our wedding photo, at his smiling, honest face, and I didn't know who he was anymore. On the 3rd day, the doorbell rang. I ignored it, assuming it was a package. Then my phone buzzed. It was Thorne. "Evelyn, are you home? I'm outside with a process server. Stevens has filed a new motion." Dread, cold, and familiar pushed the personal heartbreak aside. I opened the door. Thorne's face was grim. The server handed me another thick envelope and left. "What is it?" I asked, my voice hollow. "It's a motion to compel," Thorne said, stepping inside. "They're demanding full disclosure of all of William's business records and any personal financial documents from the last 10 years of his life. They're alleging that William may have been financially incompetent and that this familial propensity is evidence of your own likely incapacity. The cleverness of it was diabolical. They were using William, my saint, my protector, as a weapon against me." I started to laugh. It was a ragged, hysterical sound that bordered on a sob. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded stationery. "Here," I said, handing it to Thorne. "Their evidence." He read it, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. He read it twice. "Evelyn, where did you find this?" "In a tax file. From 2005. I sank into a chair, all the fight gone out of me, replaced by a vast, weary despair. He had a mistress. He had secret debts. The man I built my life with was a stranger, so you can tell Paul Stevens he can have his business records. They'll probably show he was right. Thorne was silent for a long moment, studying the note. Then he looked at me, his eyes not full of pity, but of fierce, analytical focus. "Evelyn, look at me," he said, his voice low and intense. "This changes everything, but not in the way you think." "What do you mean? Don't you see, this doesn't prove you're incompetent. It proves that William was a flawed man who kept significant secrets from you. And yet despite that, you never knew about the financial struggles, did you? The bills were always paid. The house was always maintained. Your life was stable." I blinked, trying to follow his logic through the fog of my pain. "He's alleging that William's poor judgment is evidence of your own. But this note proves the opposite. It proves that William was able to hide massive financial and personal stress from you for years. That doesn't speak to your incompetence, Evelyn. It speaks to your profound stability. You were the solid ground he built his fiction upon. You were so capable, so trusting, so unwavering that he could live a double life without you ever suspecting a thing. It was a brutal kind of absolution. He was telling me my greatest strength had been my ignorance. My trust had been the currency of my betrayal. "So what do?" I whispered. "We use it," Thorne said, his voice firm, "but carefully. We do not give them this note. This is our secret. We let them dig. We let them waste their time and money trying to prove William was bad with money. And when they fail to link it to you, they look desperate. Meanwhile, we dig ourselves." "Dig for what?" "For M," he said, his eyes glinting. "If we can find her, if we can corroborate this secret life, it completely demolishes their theory. It shows William's financial situation was a product of his deception, not his incapacity, and certainly not yours. It makes their entire new motion look like a malicious fishing expedition." He assigned a private investigator he trusted, a discreet woman named Gwen. Within 2 weeks, she had a name, Miranda Cole, a widow who had owned a small art gallery in Oakdale. She had sold the gallery and moved to Florida a year after William died. Gwen managed to get a phone number. The call was the most difficult thing I have ever done. My hand shook so violently I could barely press the digits. A refined, elderly voice answered. "Hello, Ms. Cole. My name is Evelyn Reed." I paused, the name hanging in the air. The silence on the other end was absolute tense. "I was married to William Reed." I heard a sharp intake of breath. "I see," she said, her voice guarded. "I'm not calling to cause trouble," I said, and I meant it. The anger was gone, burned away to a bed of ashes. I found a letter, addressed to M. I have some questions about my husband, about the man he really was. There was a long silence, then a sigh of resignation. "He loved you, you know," she said softly. "It tortured him, the lying, but he said you were good, pure. He couldn't bear to burden you with his failures." Over the next hour, the story tumbled out, their 10-year affair. The substantial loan William took out not for his business, but to invest in her gallery, an investment that failed. The constant financial pressure he was under, pressure he hid from everyone, especially me. "He didn't want you to see him as anything less than the pillar you leaned on," Miranda said, her voice thick with her own grief. "The trust. He set that up after he was diagnosed. It was his penance. His way of making sure you were safe no matter what mess he left behind. He was protecting you from the truth of himself." I hung up the phone, the final piece of the puzzle slotting into place with a devastating click. William's trust wasn't just about Liam. It was about his own secrets, his own shame. He had built me a fortress to protect me from the fallout of the bomb he had hidden in our basement. I called Thorne and told him everything. "We have our confirmation," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Good," he replied. "Now we wait. Let them file their motions. Let them waste their breath arguing about William's business acumen. And at the permanent hearing, when they've boxed themselves into that corner, we will annihilate them with the truth." I looked around my home, this beautiful, painful fortress built on a secret. The battle was no longer about my mind. It was about my past, and I now held the weapon that could win the war. It was a weapon forged in betrayal, but it was mine to wield. The weary despair was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. I knew the truth, and the truth, however painful, would set me free. The day of the permanent guardianship hearing arrived heavy with the promise of a summer storm. The air was thick and still, the sky a bruised purple. It felt like the world was holding its breath. This time, as I walked into the courthouse with Robert Thorne, there was no terror, only a resolute calm. I was no longer a defendant in the case of my own sanity. I was the key witness for the truth. We took our seats. Liam, Clara, and Paul Stevens were already there. Stevens looked smug, confident in his new strategy. He had a stack of financial records on his table. Liam looked tense, his jaw clenched. He still wouldn't look at me. Judge Walker entered and we rose. Her gaze swept over the room, lingering for a moment on our table, and then on theirs. "This is the matter of the guardianship of Evelyn Reed. Mr. Stevens, you may proceed." Stevens stood, oozing confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor. Since our last hearing, we have uncovered disturbing new evidence. We no longer believe Mrs. Reed's issues are merely cognitive. We believe they are part of a deeper familial pattern of financial incompetence and denial." He launched into his presentation using William's business records to paint a picture of a man on the brink of financial ruin for years. He showed loan documents, missed payments, lines of credit maxed out. "William Reed was struggling," Stevens declared, pointing a dramatic finger at me, "and his wife, the respondent, either knew and was complicit in the mismanagement or was so oblivious, so incapable of engaging with the financial reality of her own household that she failed to notice. Either scenario proves she is not competent to manage her own affairs. This is a pattern. This is a propensity." It was a clever, vicious argument. He was using William's ghost to bludgeon me. I felt a pang of fresh grief for my husband, his secrets now being laid bare in this public, ugly way. When it was Thorne's turn, he rose slowly, a small, knowing smile on his face. He looked like a chess player who had just watched his opponent walk directly into a trap. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and clear, Mr. Stevens is correct about one thing. There was a pattern of financial stress in the Reed household. But he is profoundly wrong about the cause and, more importantly, about the implications for my client. He approached the bench. The petitioner's entire theory rests on two pillars. First, that William Reed was financially incompetent, and second, that Mrs. Reed was either a participant or willfully blind to this incompetence. I am going to demolish both pillars. He turned and looked directly at Liam. The truth is, William Reed was not incompetent. He was deceptive. He was living a secret life, one that required a great deal of secret money. A ripple of curiosity went through the courtroom. Stevens's smug expression faltered. Your Honor, Thorne continued, we have discovered that William Reed was involved in a long-term extramarital affair. The financial pressures Mr. Stevens so diligently uncovered were not due to business failures. They were the result of William Reed funneling large sums of money to his mistress, including a significant failed investment in her art gallery. The gasp in the room was audible. Liam's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Clara stared at me, her mouth agape. Thorne entered the evidence into the record. He submitted the note I had found and the sworn affidavit from Miranda Cole corroborating the affair and the financial arrangements. He presented a timeline showing how William's financial struggles directly correlated with his relationship with Miranda. The trust, Thorne concluded, his voice rising with passion, was not created because William feared his son. It was created because William feared the truth. He knew that upon his death, his financial deceptions might come to light, and he wanted to ensure that the wife he had betrayed for a decade would be protected from the consequences of his actions. Evelyn Reed wasn't oblivious. She was betrayed. She wasn't incompetent. She was the one stable, trustworthy figure in a house of cards built on lies. He turned to face Liam and Clara, and the petitioners knew none of this. They seized upon William's financial records thinking they found a gold mine. Instead, they found a landmine. Their entire case is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the facts, an understanding we have now corrected for this court. This motion was not filed in good faith. It was filed in greed and ignorance. The courtroom was utterly silent. Judge Walker's face was a mask of stern contemplation. She looked from Thorne to Stevens, who was frantically shuffling papers. His confidence evaporated. "Mr. Stevens," the judge said, her voice cold, "do you have any response?" Stevens stood, flustered. "Your Honor, this is highly prejudicial and irrelevant character assassination of a deceased man who cannot defend himself." "On the contrary," Judge Walker interrupted, "it goes directly to the heart of your petition. You alleged a familial propensity for financial incompetence, Mr. Thorne has provided compelling evidence that the financial situation was the result of deception, not incapacity. You have failed to draw any credible connection to Mrs. Reed's current state. She didn't even call for a recess. She looked down at Liam, her expression one of profound disappointment. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room, "you have taken your mother to court, subjected her to invasive scrutiny, and attempted to strip her of her most basic rights. You did this based on a failed financial scheme and then on a complete misreading of your father's history. The court finds your actions to be in bad faith and predatory." She turned her gaze to me. "The petition for a permanent guardianship is denied with prejudice." The final two words were a legal death knell for their case. They could not refile. "Furthermore," Judge Walker continued, "the mutual no-contact order is now made permanent. Any violation by the petitioners will be considered contempt of court. This case is closed." The gavel fell. It was over. I felt no triumph, only a vast, hollow exhaustion. Liam was staring at me, his face a wreck of confusion, shame, and a dawning horror at what he had done and what he had learned about his father. As we stood to leave, he broke away from a furious whispering, "Clara," and took a step toward me. "Mom, I didn't know. About Dad, I looked at my son, truly looked at him for the first time since this nightmare began. The greedy, hardened man was gone, replaced by a lost boy who had just seen his world collapse twice over. "It's too late, Liam," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You didn't need to know about your father to know that what you were doing to me was wrong. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." I turned and walked out of the courtroom, with Robert Thorne leaving my son and his broken marriage in the ruins of their own making. The storm finally broke as we drove back to Pine Brook. Rain lashed the car windows, washing the dust from the streets. It felt like a purification. A month later, I received a letter from Liam forwarded by Thorne. It was short. "Mom, I've left Clara. I'm moving to Colorado. I have a lot to figure out. About me, about Dad, about everything. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. I was wrong." Liam. I didn't write back. Some wounds are too deep for words to heal. But I put the letter in a drawer next to William's note. 2 testaments to betrayal from the 2 men I had loved most in the world. Life moved on. The permanent no-contact order was a blessing. The silence in my house was finally truly peaceful. I painted with a new fury, my landscapes bolder, more vibrant, infused with all the pain and strength I had discovered within myself. One afternoon, Helen came over for tea. We sat in the garden now, bursting with defiantly healthy tomatoes and herbs. "You know, Evelyn," she said, sipping her chamomile, "you're not the woman you were a year ago." I looked around at my home, my sanctuary saved not just by William's love, but by my own fight. I looked at my paint-stained hands, tools of my own creation. "No," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like forever. "I'm not. I'm stronger. I am Evelyn Reed. I am 69 years old. I was a loyal wife, a devoted mother, a woman who trusted too much. Now I am a survivor. I learned that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the quiet gathering of strength before you roar. And when you do, the whole world has to stop and listen. My life is my own again. And it is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything."